What's up, peeps? I know I said earlier I was gonna talk about Bel Air, but I'm gonna just save that for Sunday since we watched Morbius today. I felt like it would have made way more sense just to review Morbius today, and we'll do Bel Air on Sunday. So Morbius, I watched. This is probably like the first Marvel movie I've watched in a long ass time. I think since like in terms of like all the way through, probably since Far From Home. I can't think of the last Marvel movie I watched after that. Like that was new. But this movie, I remember I only decided to watch it honestly because I saw the Rotten Tomato score, which was like 16%. So I had to see like, okay, is it that bad? Because I actually was not gonna watch it initially. I actually was just gonna probably just skip it because I kind of been getting a little bit over CBMs a little bit, but I decided to watch it, and I don't think it's as bad as people are saying. I'm not gonna say it's good either, but it's definitely nowhere near as bad as people say. Not the worst Marvel movie. I would watch this before I'd like watch Age of Ultron again. I can probably name a bunch of Marvel movies I'd watch this over, but I will say it's not good. It feels like a comic book film that would have came out like in 2005 to like the mid-aughts. It has that feeling about it, which, in a way could be a good thing, but it definitely does feel dated. The effects are awful. I think Jared Leto did a solid job. I don't think he was as good as like in the scene he was in Snyder Cut, but I thought he was fine in this movie. It's serviceable. It's very much just the Venom formula, just switch a few things, but essentially that. I mean, Matt Smith as the villain was actually really good. And I'm like, I recognize this dude, but yeah. Matt Smith did a pretty good job with it. Like, for what he had to work with, yeah. But it's very meh. So the story essentially is Michael has a condition where he can't walk. And he's basically, or at least we're told, he's, been having that problem. I'll admit, I only really know Morbius from the Spider-Man animated series cartoon and I think a couple of comics. So I don't have like some super knowledge on the character. But so he ends up basically, I'm just going to do a quick rundown version before I go into the plot. And yeah, this will be spoilers. Because even though there's not really anything to spoil, but anyway. He does an experiment where he mixes vampire bat blood with his blood, and he starts regaining the ability to walk, but with the downside. And this is where I think my issue starts. As much as I like Matt Smith as the villain, they should have just went, instead of going kind of like the typical, because it just is a ripoff of Venom. Somebody else gets the symbiote, Venom has to fight him. But now it's Morbius has to confront his friend who becomes a vampire. Instead of going that route, maybe they should have gone make it almost like a legit vampire movie where he ends up taking it, but it has a negative effect and he starts killing people. Almost like a werewolf story in a way, but like do it something like that. I think that would have been far more interesting. And Tyrese Gibson plays a cop, which here's his character and then the other cop don't make any sense because they make you get Tyrese Gibson. He's not a big name, but he was in the Fast and the Furious movies. He has somewhat of a name to him still. Why would you cast him just to basically do nothing? He essentially just is there just to show up at the crime scene or confront Morbius. That's it. He doesn't actually do anything of substance in the movie. Could have easily swapped him out and just cast some random schmuck. But like, okay, I guess I'll go into what I liked. I liked some of the cinematography, minus the I'm more talking about like some of the set design. I really did not like this. The CGI was awful. It was really bad. I like that it had not a serious tone, but it wasn't like your typical comic book film where you're gonna have like a joke every 5 fucking minutes, you know. So I like that, but aside from and like I mentioned, Matt Smith, he played the villain so good in the sense of he was charismatic. He every scene he was in was pretty good. And I thought he had pretty good chemistry with Jared. So and even when he died, it was actually not like an emotional moment, but it was like okay, that was done well. But aside from that, I guess we'll start with the story now. But we're gonna be getting into spoilers, so but here we go. So the movie opens up. Basically, we get kind of like, well, initially we get him getting the bats. We kind of get a quick shot of him in some country getting the bats. Then, like, we kind of do a time line where we see him as a kid, and I'm not gonna lie, the kid actor for Michael sucked. He was cringe. Granted, I'm happy that it was only like a 10 minute. It was about a 10 minute, 10 to 11 minute sequence. It wasn't too long. They didn't spend like 30 minutes on it. Granted, I do think somewhat this movie could have maybe used another 30 minutes. It should have just went full 2 hours because I think, especially with his caretaker, who actually is a pretty good actor, they casted, but you only see him in like a couple of scenes. Like, yeah, we see him in this beginning sequence, but then we just kind of see him in the background, and then obviously, I'll just spoil it, he dies later in the movie. And his death is just not that emotional because it's like you only see a couple of scenes, and I'll get more to that later. But so we see his caretaker, and we see like he's clearly in a science, and this is where we're introduced to the new kid, Lucian, and Michael changes his name to Milo, and before he basically is about to leave for New York, Milo gets jumped by some, kids, and then he ends up leaving for New York, and this is where then we kind of do a time jump where we see Michael where he's at now, and he's about to get a Nobel Peace Prize, and he turns it down. And this is where we're introduced to his girlfriend, Martine, who she's an okay character, typical kind of, love interest kind of deal. But, so after that, he, does, a test, with the blood, the vampire blood. This is where we get we see the vampire, the bats, which I'm not gonna lie, you could clearly tell the shot of the bats in that could just be a Batman movie, and I get it. It fits because Morbius is a vampire. It doesn't fully bother me. I'm like, that's kind of Batman-y, but whatever. But he mixes the blood, but he initially doesn't think it works, but it works. He tests it on a mouse, and it ends up working. So, and he's taking care of some girl, like, who also has the same disease, and then we get a scene of him visiting Milo, and I'll admit, every scene where him and Matt, and like I mentioned, Matt Smith, are in together, they're actually pretty good. Like, they have, like, they actually did a good job of portraying, like, best friends who've known each other for a long time. And they make a pact because Michael basically asks him to go in, basically to do it with him because he wants to basically potentially erase and fix him. But, this is before the negative effects. And I think another thing I like is this movie's paced pretty good. It gets going pretty quick. Because there's hour and a half movies that drag, This actually goes pretty quick. And now we're essentially he tests it on himself on a boat. But then, obviously, it initially goes wrong. And, like, one of the soldiers, like, I think Mercs, they basically go down with Martine because they think they notice Michael's missing. Michael then, because the guys are startled, they shoot at him, and then he fucks them up. And this is where the R rating was needed. I think I remember saying this to the lead up of this movie. This should be like 30 Days a Night. Even if you don't love that movie, it should have been as violent as that, like, or something similar. Because every time, like, you're getting a guy who has like claws, he has teeth, and you're telling me there's just not a lot of blood? Really? Nah, man. Nah. It just doesn't work. So he kills them. He kills everybody. And you get, there's little bits of blood, but there's just not a lot. It just, anyway, he kills the guys minus Martine, who was knocked out because one of the guys pushed her and she was knocked out. Michael erases the footage, and he erases the footage and he disappears. And then this is where we're introduced to Tyrese, and like I mentioned, he didn't need to be in this movie. If you wanted that cop character, you could have just cast some other guy, because he just kind of just shows up at the crime scene and that's it. Same thing with his partner. They just show up at the crime scene and that's it. There's no like actual point to their character. I understand you can't get every single character development, but if you're gonna cast a Tyrese, at least have him do something. Like, or even at least have him confront Morbius in the final act. That doesn't even happen. Like, I think like that's where I would tweak the movie, and I'll get more to that when I mention more Matt Smith's character. But then, so he goes back. He visits Martine, who's like kind of knocked out still. The police visit Martine, who, you know, is revived. While this happens, one of the like doctor, you know, people who worked at the lab, you did see earlier in the movie, ends up getting killed, and they make you think it's Michael. Actually, no, before that, Milo visits Michael at his office, because Michael's doing throughout the film, he's like testing his powers. And this is like the part of the film where I'm like, this is really like an early aughts or mid-aughts comic book film. Like, it just has that vibe. And in a way, that could be a good thing, because it's just bad for traditional reasons. Not bad because there's some weird bullshit in it. So he ends up trying to test if he can go without blood. And this is where Milo arrives, and Milo gives him some blood. And he tries to basically keep Milo away, because he basically is starting to see it as a curse. Because, you know, he ends up thinking he killed a colleague of his. And once again, when you make it not bloody, it just, you know how much more you could have hammered that scene home, where they find the girl's body and there's blood. You don't have to, I'm not saying it needs to be like Rob Zombie violent, but God, maybe some blood on the wall. You know, it's more they could have hammered it home, especially for Morbius's character. This is someone he knows. But no, we gotta be PG-13 because we got a partnership with Disney. Fucking hell. Or they work together in some way for Spider-Man. It's such bullshit. Anyway. So Milo tries to get the serum, but Morbius doesn't want to give it to him because he doesn't want to harm his friend. It's understandable. And so they do try to go with Morbius being an anti-hero, which I don't really like. But this was at this point in the film, I'm like, because they didn't really market there was going to be another vampire in the movie. I think one thing, I guess I'll side point why I think a lot of people are mad is because in the marketing, yeah, you get like Vulture and all the Spider-Man. You don't get that until the very end, and I think I don't even think that the scene where you see the Spider-Man on the wall that's like graffitied, I don't even think you see it. I don't even think it's there. And you do get little hints that it's tied to Venom, like they mention Venom. They mention, that thing in San Francisco, which is from the Venom movie. So you get little things like that. And Daily Bugle's mentioned. And I think that's another thing. It's not like your tradition in that sense. Like, it's not trying to... Besides, like, I'll admit, that credit scene is clearly tacked on. It almost does. It feels very tacked on. And maybe they originally weren't going to go with this connected thing, but maybe they had to change it because, you know, No Way Home and all that shit. But, um, but they should have, with this movie, I, when Milo was turned down, I'm like, oh, he's going to drink the serum, isn't he? And he's going to become a vampire. I'm like, ugh. As much as I liked him as a villain in the movie, and I really did, they should have not have done that. It's so they should have went with it's Morbius is not the antagonist, like in a sense, like have the police be the ones who are coming after him, led by Tyrese. That's what the movie should have been. I think that would have been more interesting. It would have instead of going the typical like let's have just another version of a vampire. Like, But anyway, so Milo storms off. Then the next scene, Morbius tries to sneak from the lab, but then gets confronted by the police. He manages to nearly evade them, but then Tyrese ends up arresting him. Here's the problem I have. When we got to this sequence, and you can say this is a nitpick, because, you know, maybe there's other issues with this movie, but my fundamental issue with this is they just saw him jump, like, I'm assuming that had to have been like 100-some feet. He jumped high. You're telling me they're just gonna throw him in lockup? And I get it. They haven't charged him formally. He hasn't been, like, you know, sentenced. I understand that. But come on. They just saw this dude jump like 100 feet. They're not gonna just keep him in a lockup. And God, man. It's just like, I remember watching this movie, I'm like, they're just gonna act like he didn't just jump that high, so we're just gonna throw him in, you know, jail uniform and just okay. So Tyrese and I think Owl was the name of the guy of his partner, and they interrogate him about like how he became this, and Morbius has no answers for them. Then Milo posing as Michael's lawyer gives him some blood, but this is where we get the reveal that Milo took some too. And Morbius, after breaking out, which he literally, his fucking cell was right by the city where he could jump out, like, conveniently. It's like, come on, man. Anyway, he breaks out, and Michael confronts Milo about taking the serum. And they're basically going for the typical, it's almost like the somewhat similar dynamic, and I know a lot of people don't like this movie, but X-Men Origins with Sabretooth and Logan, it's like that kind of dynamic where Milo is embracing his killing people, and this is where we get the reveal he's the one who killed the girl. And Michael refuses, but Michael doesn't want to fight him, so we get kind of a fight, and I'm like, some of the effects, man, whenever, like, they jumping and there's this weird effect. It's like, I think it's supposed to be like a speed effect, but it just looks awful. When they do it every time they do something, like any kind of movement, that kind of effect shows up, and it just is noticeable. It's like, it just doesn't look good. So they fight for a second, but Milo kills a couple of cops because he's basically trying to frame Michael, essentially. That's kind of what he's going for. So after this, while Milo goes to a club and kills a couple of guys, Michael meets with a recently now revived Martine. He asks her for help and to give because he wants to use basically his plan is to use to mix this certain thing that will essentially it's going to be poison for him and Milo. We get like the typical kissing scene. Oh no, initially Milo confronts Martine about Michael's location, but she lies to him and says, no, I don't know where he is. But then, yeah, then they kiss for a second, and then he sees it. So now back to the caretaker we saw earlier in the film. He confronts Milo about the murders, and he essentially you kind of get the vibe of jealousy because he's jealous that Michael he thinks he sees Michael as the good son and he doesn't like him. So you get, and I actually thought the two did a really good like back and forth. But the problem is, we didn't get enough of this caretaker. We see him in the beginning a little bit, but then he just kind of disappears. Like there's a scene where they initially learned about the boat attack, and then they talk for like a quick second, and then they cut. It's like you don't see him that much. We should have. That's why I was saying like there should have been an extra like 20 minutes, maybe like give it an extra 20 to 30 minutes. It should have like just so we can get a little bit more of him. Just because it was just like like I was calling everything. I'm like, oh, he's gonna kill him here. It's just like, so he kills him by slicing him with a knife, and you do get a little bit of blood. And in his dying breath, I think the guy's name was Nikolai. He calls Michael. Michael rushes to his side, and dies in his arms. While this happens, because Michael has echolocation, he hears Milo attacking Martine, and then he gets back to her, and the lab is destroyed. Before that, there's like a quick scene where Milo, because I guess some like street punks take it over, and Michael takes back the lab. He kind of like beats up on them. You kind of get that typical kind of scene in a comic book movie. But anyway, so Michael confronts Milo, and I'm actually shocked they killed her. I didn't think they would go that route. I mean, I'm like, oh, he's gonna kidnap her in some way or something. So they fight for like a little bit, and that final fight is just a CGI mess. It's like the same problem I had with the fight in Venom. It was just like CGI gloop just being thrown at each other. Instead of gloop, it was that weird speed effect thrown at each other over and over again. But Michael is able to, he does a scream, which is able to summon some bats, and with the help of the bats, he ends up killing Milo with that poison. And we get like a little nice moment between the two where he kind of goes back to a human for a second before he dies, which I thought, okay, that was solid. And then, unknowingly, Martine, it revives, so she's basically a vampire now. I don't know where it's going to lead to, but then the police show up, and I think that's it. Like, besides, like, the little post-credits, I'm trying to think if it ends in, like, any crazy way, like Morbius kind of takes off. And then, like, yeah, the scenes where he's flying kind of are not cool. The effects aren't good. It's not good. It is kind of cringy when they do that. I'm like I said, I would have rather them have it be like it's him versus like the police and the city coming after him. I think that would have been a far more interesting story. Even like have it to where he even accidentally kills Milo and even the father figure. It should have been something like that. Just going it's another version. Like, really? You didn't need to do that. It's just. But when Morbius is in like when he's in the full creature look, it's fine. And honestly, I'm cool if he's gonna be in like a trench coat. Don't get me wrong. I like his costume in the comics, but I'm fine if he's like in a trench coat. That can work for a movie, So then we get a credit scene where Vulture breaks out, and then we get a scene where he talks to Morbius about forming a team, which is basically setting up Sinister Six. And from the rumors I'm hearing is essentially this is going to be all in the Andrew Garfield universe, which is good. I'm actually kind of cool with that. So I'm guessing they're going to maybe now just make Morbius full out villain, hopefully. But overall, what do I think of this movie? It's very meh. Not the worst thing in the world. Nowhere near the worst Marvel movie. I'm like, motherfuckers, you gotta watch movies, man. You gotta watch more movies. Nowhere near the worst movie. It's just, it feels like a comic book film I would have saw when I was a kid. It's paced like one, not the greatest in the world. It's not, besides certain parts, they didn't really try to set up a universe. I mentioned, I really did like Matt Smith. Every scene he was in, I thought he carried the scene even with what he was working with. Jared Leto was fine. I don't think he was amazing or anything, but he was fine. I thought his dynamic with Milo was really good. It's just some parts which is kind of basic bitch writing, but it's, I don't think, I don't think you should pay for it. It's one of those you can, if you just sail the high seas, or just wait for home video. If you really want to see it just to go to the theater, then yeah, but I don't think there's anything in it that warrants, you gotta pay money. If I were to give it out of 10, I think on Twitter I gave it a 5.5. I'm teetering. I think I might just keep it at a 5. I think it's not the worst thing in the world. It's middle of the road. I won't watch it again, most likely. But it's not, it's just your run-of-the-mill CDM if the problems it has, it's just your traditional problems. I think there definitely things that could have been done better. It didn't need to be a traditional, they didn't need to make Milo a vampire. As much as I really like fucking wrong doctor, Matt Smith, they didn't have to go that route. I think it would have been better if Morbius is the only vampire and it was just a story of him going crazy. And it should have been R fucking rated. It just should. The lack of an R rating is what's kind of honestly overall hurting Marvel. Because there's so many characters in Marvel that you could easily make R rated, but they're so scared to do it because with Sony, they have this partnership with Disney, and I think that's what it is. Because of that, that's why I didn't end up watching Venom. Dude, you're bringing in Carnage and he's not R rated? It's this partnership with Disney that's hurting them. This movie should essentially have been 30 Days a Night, but just more of a comic book movie, but something like that. Just frustrating. It's but it's not the worst thing in the world. You can maybe wait for it to be on a streaming service, sail the high seas, and maybe if you want to go out and just for a matinee, yeah. But yeah, a 5 out of 10 I'd give this movie. So my plan is Sunday night I will be I'll be going in on Bel Air. I'll be going in on that show. So that'll be on Sunday. But take one more hit and peace out. But other than that, fuck Warner Brothers. Fuck Disney. Definitely fuck Disney, especially now. Fuck LeBron. Fuck Colin Kaepernick. Fuck Seth Rogen. Fuck Kevin Smith. And fuck the Biden administration. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. Sunday. Sorry. Peace.